Hello, this is Erica from ericaelsewhere.com, and welcome to my three-part series on how I learned fluent Spanish. So over the course of 3 videos, I'm going to be breaking down for you the 6 methods that I use to accomplish this without ever having studied Spanish in college and way before I ever considered moving abroad. I'll be linking to parts 2 and 3 of this video series, so be sure to check those out as well. And if you're interested in hearing this information in Spanish to work on your Spanish listening skills, or if you just want to hear me speak Spanish, then I'll link to that here as well. If you're interested in videos on learning languages, raising bilingual children, and adventures as an expat in Mexico, then be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss any of my videos. Now, if you want to jump right into these 6 methods along with a lot of free resources that I've provided for you, then be sure to check out the description link below because I've linked to my quick start guide to learning fluent Spanish. You can also find further information on my blog at www.ericaelsewhere.com. So first of all, a little background about me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Erica. I was born and raised in the USA, in Kentucky. My native language is obviously English. The native language of all of my family is English. I didn't start learning Spanish, kind of learning Spanish actually, until I was around 13 years old. Prior to that, I had no Spanish influence. The turning point for me was when my family switched over from an English Bible congregation that we were a part of over to a Spanish one. So at that point, I really started to need to learn Spanish. Now, within a few short weeks after beginning to actively learn Spanish, I was able to give Bible presentations in front of our congregation. A few months later, I was pretty conversational. I didn't have many problems holding down a conversation. And by the time I turned 18, I was able to begin work as a Spanish medical interpreter. So let me break down for you the 6 methods that I use to accomplish this. It's important to keep in mind that I'm calling these methods and not steps, because there's no need to follow them in any particular order. You don't need to master 1 before moving to 2. In fact, I encourage you to do everything at the same time in order to really create an environment of Spanish immersion, which is absolutely crucial to learn the language fluently. Let's get started with method number 1. Listen to Spanish via songs, audiobooks, podcasts, and talk radio, for example. Now, my very first exposure to Spanish was through music. In fact, I wasn't the first person in my family to begin to learn Spanish. It was actually my dad. So he would put Spanish music on in the car, Selena and a lot of other artists. And I remember that he would try to teach me the meaning behind some of the lyrics. But honestly, I was just completely not interested at the time. I remember saying, "But Dad, why would I ever need to learn Spanish? We live in the United States. I mean, not interested, sorry." Unfortunately, that was my point of view back then. But I really loved the music. I would dance to it, I would sing the songs. Before I knew it, I was singing the songs from beginning to end, having absolutely no clue as to what I was saying. So about a year later, when it came time for me to begin to actually learn Spanish, because as I mentioned, we were now in a Spanish-speaking biblical congregation. So I needed to speak Spanish to the members of the congregation and in the ministry work. So to my surprise, once I started actively trying to learn, there were so many vocabulary words that were so familiar to me. And at first I didn't understand why. I mean, I was supposedly completely new to the Spanish language. However, eventually I realized that I had learned so much from those songs. Now, keep in mind, I didn't know the meaning behind the words as I was singing them. However, my brain was now accustomed to listening to them. My tongue was already accustomed to speaking them. So by the time I learned what the words actually meant, I only had to learn once and it just stuck in my head. So I want you to do the same thing. Find songs that you enjoy, that are catchy, that have clear lyrics. It's very important to choose music with clear lyrics. Stay away from the ones that have really slurred speech or just a lot of slang. You can get to that later, but right now you're trying to establish a foundation. Find those songs that you like and listen to them repeatedly. When you're ready, start singing along with those songs. follow the lyrics. Now, printing out the lyrics or following along with a printed version of the lyrics was not something that I did back then, but keep in mind, I wasn't yet trying to learn the language. If you're watching this video, you obviously are. So I would suggest, at least for a couple of times, following along with the printed version of the lyrics when you listen to the song. That's going to help you in knowing where a word it begins and where it ends, because as beginners, that's something that it's hard to pick up. So following along with those lyrics is really going to be a help to you. Now, the songs you choose don't have to be slow. It may be helpful for you to start out with slow songs, but find music that you enjoy. It doesn't matter if it's relatively fast, as long as it's catchy, you enjoy it, and it has clear lyrics. Again, it is very important for the lyrics to be clear. If you are having trouble knowing where to start, then definitely check out my quick start guide that I have linked down below for a list of several songs that I find to be very clear and easy for beginners. In fact, many of those are the ones that I listened to when I was first starting out with the language, so they kind of take me back down memory lane. Now, music isn't the only thing that you can listen to in Spanish, of course. There are audiobooks, podcasts, talk radio. Now, with audiobooks, I think it's really nice to start with children's books, especially if you're able to have a printed copy. For example, an audiobook and an ebook to go along with that. Children's stories, for obvious reasons, are very easy to understand. In fact, I had a book when I was first starting out called My Book of Bible Stories, specifically written for children, and the speaker was very clear, easy to understand. I would follow along with my book. I would also follow along with my English book sometimes to make sure that I was picking up on some of those vocabulary words, and that went a long way in helping me. So find books that you enjoy, find simple books to start out, listen to them, start repeating what you're hearing and getting a feel for how the rhythm of Spanish works. Don't obsess at this point over the meaning of everything you're hearing. Pick out some key words, some key phrases that you really want to remember. Write them down if you want to, but remember, we're trying to learn vocabulary in context. I don't know about you, but for me, list of vocabulary words have never really worked for me. I really need to hear words in context in order for them to stay in my head. So don't obsess over the meaning of everything, but do pick out some keywords and phrases and use those to begin building your vocabulary. So podcast and talk radio are also awesome resources. Why? Well, because a lot of that is based on interview. So when you think about a conversation, it's really all about asking someone a question, listening to their response, and answering whatever question they ask you back. So an interview is based on that same style. When you hear that question answer sort of conversation, it's really going to help you pick up on all of those subtleties involved in Spanish conversation that are going to really help you out when it comes time to speak to native Spanish speakers. Now, when you're listening to your songs and your books, definitely don't just listen one time and move on to something else. Listen to them repeatedly. I mean, think about the way a baby learns a language. If you have babies or small children, or you've played with children, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Babies love for you to read them the same stories, for you to play the same games with them, for you to sing them the same songs. And for us adults, eventually that can get really tiring and we're like, okay, again. But trust me, babies know exactly what they're doing. Numerous studies have shown that that repetition really helps young children and babies in their vocabulary retention, and it helps them expand their vocabulary faster and more efficiently than simply being exposed to a wide variety of material. Listening repeatedly to the same things goes a long way in language retention, and it will for you too. So obviously you're going to have a lot of different songs and a lot of different audiobooks that you're listening to, but once you find your favorites, definitely listen to them again and again, and you're going to see how much it helps you with retention. Method number 2. Watch shows, movies, and the news in Spanish. So now we've kind of trained our ear into hearing Spanish, but we need to add in some visuals, which is going to give us the added advantage of being able to see the actor's body language with the audio. That's going to go a long way in aiding our understanding. One of the things that really helped me a lot when I was first learning Spanish was a program called DESTINOS. You guys might remember that. It was this melodramatic TV show specifically designed to teach Spanish. So some people found it corny, but I really loved it because I got to the point where I was into the story and I could follow along because the speech was so clear and everything was exaggerated. But that's exactly what you need when you're learning a language. Now, don't just watch your shows and your movies passively and think that you're going to learn Spanish through some sort of osmosis. It's just not going to happen. Really be an active listener and try to use all of your senses when you're watching these programs. So one of the ways of doing that is by using TPR, or total physical response. So TPR is basically a method that teachers use to teach a student a language and that students use to acquire that language. And it's based on how we learned our first language as children. Basically, we're acting out everything that we're teaching or learning. So as an English teacher to Chinese students online, this is something that I used all the time. It's something that we were encouraged to use constantly. These students were starting from zero, and we spoke no Chinese, so it was complete immersion. We would act out everything that we said in an exaggerated way. So we wouldn't just teach the parts of the body like arm, nose. No, it was wave your arms, touch your nose. And the students would do the same thing as us while repeating what we were saying, and it was amazing how much they could retain. So obviously, unless you're watching a program that's specifically designed to teach you Spanish, no one is going to be doing all of these dramatic gestures unless it's a children's program perhaps. But what you can do is once you learn the meaning behind certain phrases, you can act that out. It may sound funny, it may look funny, but you take all of your body, act out what the actors are saying, and say it at the same time. This is going to be huge. It's going to go a long way into taking you from a passive listener to an active listener and really getting those vocabulary words and those phrases ingrained into your brain. Regarding subtitles, subtitles are a great tool. Preferably, you're going to be watching a show that you're already familiar with. Perhaps you've already watched it in English. If not, then it's fine to turn on the English subtitles to get an idea of what's going on. Later, you'll probably want to turn on the Spanish subtitles because, again, when you're a complete beginner, it's kind of hard to even hear where one word begins and where one ends, especially if the speech is very fast. So looking at the subtitles can kind of help you out and at least knowing what words the speaker is saying, even if you don't know the meaning behind all of them. However, I caution you, please don't use the subtitles as a crutch. Please don't exclusively use the subtitles when you're watching a program. Why? Because then you're not going to be watching the screen. You're not going to be absorbing all of that body language that we talked about before. When you're learning a language, it's very important to take in all of the body language, all of the surroundings of what you're seeing, and incorporate that or associate that with what you're hearing. It's the way we all learned our first language. And remember, when you're actually speaking to a person, as nice as it would be to have subtitles coming out of their mouth, wouldn't that be lovely? It's just not real life. So really train your ear to hear, train your eyes to see what you're viewing on the screen. It's going to go a long way in helping you in real life conversation. Watching the news is another great option. I mean, think about it. Newscasters are trained specifically to be able to speak in a clear, comprehensible way. Even if they're speaking fast, as Spanish tends to be spoken quickly, at least to our ear of native English speakers, it's still clear speech. Plus, as an added bonus, watching the news gives us some nice real-life material to use when we're trying to start a conversation with a native Spanish speaker. So, to review, in methods 1 and 2, we've discussed starting to build our vocabulary in Spanish, not with lists, not with boring drills, but by really taking in that vocabulary in context. We've talked about songs, books, podcasts, news, movies, shows. Find things that you enjoy in English. Listen and watch those same things in Spanish. That's going to keep you engaged and it's going to build your vocabulary in a natural way. I can't wait for you to join me on the rest of this series. If you like this video, if it helped you out in any way, be sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss any of my other videos. Again, if you're interested in hearing this video in Spanish, then definitely check out this link here and subscribe to my second channel where I upload videos in Spanish. And if you want to get started right now with those 6 methods, then be sure to download my quick start guide completely for free that I've linked in the description below. I'm so happy to have you guys here with me today. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you on part 2. Bye-bye.